Hello and a very warm welcome to the Transport and Climate Change Week 2022. My name is Nadja Tega and I'll be your host for today. Usually I am a transport advisor working for GIZ and I support our partner countries in developing their climate strategies in the sector. But today I'll try my best to guide you through the day. And it's my great pleasure to welcome participants on site here. Great that you all are here and online. Welcome to you, esteemed participants. We have partners from our partner countries here today with us. We have, for example, the Honorable Special Secretary, Mr. Mina, here. It's my great pleasure to meet you. And of course, we have online participants from today, right now, mostly from Africa, Asia, and Southeast Europe. The idea, I think, as you know, we have been now seeing 3 days of the Transport and Climate Change Week is really about exchanging between peers, sharing best practices, ideas, innovations, and of course showing that mitigating emissions from the transport sector can be done. And right now we're doing this for the 5th time. So we are meeting for the 3rd, or we've been meeting in Berlin for 3 times, and now this is the 2nd time that we do it in virtual format. And this time, after last year, we do it even hybrid. So, well, it's amazing to see all of you here after 2 years of COVID pandemic. I'm really, really happy to see you all here. But I'm also very, very pleased that we can do this virtually as well, because I think this number of 1,300 participants over the last 3 days shows how accessible we are making this week. And let's take actually a look at the program that we have for today, for you online and on site. We have a program. We are starting right now with the opening, and we have a panel discussion on multilateralism, on collaborating to reduce emissions and make transport more sustainable. And that is followed by a fishbowl discussion. If you don't know what that is, I didn't know either, stay tuned and find out. And then after a short break, we'll have the afternoon with global impulses. We look at what did we do actually in the last 3 days and what have we learned. And then we have a panel discussion by Mobilize Your City on shaping net zero cities with active transport and public transport. And then in the end, we close the Berlin day. Of course, that's not the end of the Transport Week. We have program afterwards in Latin America and then tomorrow again from here. Like every year, this would not be possible if we weren't working together with so many partners. We have the Asian Development Bank, for example, right now in the audience. We have the Slocat Partnership for Sustainable Low Carbon Transport with us. We have Agora Verkehrswende here, World Resources Institute, and a million of other partners that support us. Maybe we can see the cloud with all the logos right now. Can you show us? 1 second. I think, perfect. I think it's coming up right now. There you see that we are really not doing this alone. We are doing this with lots of partners, some of them, like I said, even here. So a big thank you already to those that help us make this day possible. One thing that I forgot right now, I'm sorry, we want to show you the Platz platform. So the platform that enables all of us, you here and also you online, to exchange with us. That's the platform that you have registered on, where you can follow the live stream right now and where you find a chat window and a window for polls at the right of the live stream. Yeah, there you can post your questions, your comments, everything that you want to share with us. And then, of course, we also have the agenda there. We have a networking space that you can use throughout the breaks that we have during the day. And, well, use this to interact with us. Use also social media, of course. The hashtags are Transport Week 22 and We Change Transport. And, yeah, make sure that we make this peer exchange conference a success. All this, what I've just been describing and what we have been doing over the last week would not be possible without the support of the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, and now also with the support of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action. And that is why it's my great pleasure to welcome on stage now, for the first time in 2 years, very exciting, Ms. Schwenk, Ms. Birgit Schwenk. She is a Climate Director at the Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us. And we have Miss Tanja Gönner with us. She is the chair of the management board of GIZ. She is currently in Lithuania. That's why she can't be here with us in person, but we are very excited to have her with us as an online participant, really showing how we are creating a hybrid event here and connecting people wherever they are on the world. So thank you both for being with me today, Ms. Schwenk. Great that you're here on stage, Ms. Gönner. So great to have you with us remotely. And I would really like to pose my first question already to you, Ms. Schwenk. So you have been working at the Ministry for Environment for 20 years, and now with the change of the government, you took on a new position as a director at the Department for Climate Protection at this Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Protection. And I would really like to know what your view is, and why is transport important for this new German government that we elected in September? Why is the transport important in achieving the German climate goals?
Yes, thank you very much. And first of all, let me thank you for inviting me here. And I congratulate you, actually. What an impressive array of actors, international organizations that you bring together here. Yes, and this is a very important topic for achieving our climate goals. Some of you may be aware that the German target of achieving net zero emissions is a very ambitious one. Last year, we've had our constitutional court asking us to become even more ambitious on reducing our emissions. So by now, we want to reach net zero overall by 2045. And the very first thing that my minister did, Minister Habeck, when he came into office, was ask us to do a stocktake of where we stand with our GHG emission reductions. And it's not too surprising that the result was that we have to become a lot more ambitious in reaching our goals. So we actually have to accelerate our efforts, our reductions, by about a factor of 2 or 3 in all of the sectors, and actually the one where we have to become better most is the transport sector. So we know that a quarter of global energy-related energy consumption, of global energy-related GHG emissions is actually in the transport sector. And our Climate Change Act asks us to reduce our emissions in the transport sector by almost half until 2030 compared to 1990. So there is a lot to be done in the transport sector. We are already doing quite a bit. We are focusing on e-mobility, especially. We have in the coalition treaty of our government, for instance, envisaged a national pedestrian strategy, which is actually a subject that is very dear to me, because it is so often forgotten that pedestrians are a very important actor. And we have seen how difficult it is actually in the climate, in the public transport sector and in the private transport sector and actually in the industrial transport sector to become better. So at the moment, we are collecting our ideas in the form of an immediate climate action program that we're preparing. We're already introducing some measures in the energy sector, and the transport sector will be addressed in the coming months. So look out for our immediate climate action program and look out for those extra measures that we're taking with respect to the transport sector. But yeah, maybe I'll stop right here at the moment and leave it to the rest of the discussion to become more concrete on some of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schwenk. And great that you mentioned pedestrians and their role in transport, because I want to point you to that session that we have this afternoon on active mobility here, actually. But now my next question goes to Ms. Gönner. Ms. Gönner, you know the Transport Week from last year. You were also remotely, obviously, part of the Transport Week last year. This year we have, again, over 1,300 participants. I mentioned that in the beginning already, from more than 135 countries, which makes me very, very happy. And we have been seeing 42 sessions up till now. This is really, I think, a good example of how we are connecting the world, how we manage really to get in touch and talk with people from many countries and exchange of their ideas and what they're doing in the transport sector. I would like to know from you, why do you think this opportunity, an opportunity like that for exchanging, for talking about what one's do in one country and then what is done in another country is so important for GIZ, but also, of course, for all our participants?
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Tanja, and a warm welcome to all of you in Berlin. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to join this from Vilnius. And I will congratulate for this very great event. And coming back to your question, I think transport is a system that touches all of our lives. We all move around in one way or the other, and it's quite interesting. Yes, on one hand, maybe all of us as pedestrians, and in one way or the other every day, and we all depend on the transport system accessible to us. So transport is a very political topic everywhere in Germany and all around the world. And the sector is run by a diverse set of actors. Ms. Schwenk was mentioning it: city administrations, private sector, public operators, national authorities. So decarbonizing transport is a common challenge that requires joint solutions. Last year already, and again now, I perceive the Transport and Climate Change Week really as a forum that is addressing that challenge and the solutions. It enables us to exchange experiences, transfer knowledge, and to learn jointly from each other. And it has a clear focus on the needs and the ideas of developing and emerging countries. At GIZ, we cooperate with partners in around 40 countries on that topic, and we try to bring together this wealth of experience in 1 week. That's the idea behind the Transport and Climate Change Week. I think this week shows us something very important. And you mentioned it before, transport can be decarbonized, real change can be achieved by telling the stories of success. With this, we do not only enhance our capacities, but it motivates and shows we are not alone. And motivation is the key for success. And in particular, in these times of the COVID pandemic, I'd like to emphasize how COVID changed and even limited our opportunities for exchange. I'm very happy to see that the organizing team of the Transport and Climate Change Week managed to merge the best of online and on-site events in such a hybrid format. And last but not least, I would like to thank Ms. Schwenk, you and the International Climate Initiative for enabling us to organize the Transport and Climate Change Week for the 5th time already. Exchanging among peers is so important. And I think we learned really a lot the past 2 years in how to do that in different ways. But we also need really not only online, but also on-site events. And because of this, I'm really happy to be again with you.
Great, thank you so much, Ms. Gönner. And also, of course, this thank you comes from our side, Ms. Schwenk. We have heard from Ms. Gönner why exchanging is so important, building up capacities, learning from others. But of course, each country needs to take its own steps as well. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what Germany actually plans for the next years to decarbonize the sector. You mentioned there is a net zero goal, transport cannot be ignored. What are you planning to do?
Yes, we're very far from ignoring the transport sector, fortunately. And I already mentioned 1 or 2 of the things that we want to achieve. And actually, very much at the center is moving towards e-mobility. So we have committed to having 15 million of fully electrified cars on the road by 2030. Also, by 2030, we support the European goal of having 0 emissions in the transport sector by 2035. And by 2030, yet again, we want to have 75% of the rail network electrified. And also in terms of other modes of transport, we're thinking, or we're actually focusing on aviation as well and on shipping. And with these sectors, being electrified is very hard, or at the moment with our technology is actually impossible. So this is why in this sector we're focusing on developing synthetic fuels which are based on green hydrogen. So this is the way we have to go in these sectors. And of course, the whole policy has an international dimension as well. So we're here for the International Climate Initiative, and we have a number of projects here, especially with assisting and working together with other countries on decarbonizing their transport sector. I'm sure that a lot of them have been mentioned here in this event, and a number more will be explained maybe by Ms. Gönner or also in the course of the day. But let me point out again how important the transport sector is all around the world. Actually, in most of the countries, looking at the sectors which have the highest energy consumption, actually transport comes first or second. So this is really something that we have to work together to address this. Germany has a G7 presidency this year, so this is yet another role in which we can address transport decarbonization, and we're working towards that. And yeah, so we need all of you as well, all the actors, all the organizations, the private sector to achieve this. And so I can only encourage you to help us, actually. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Schwenk. Yeah, thanks for this explanation on what Germany is planning. What I would like to know from you is, in light of everything else that is happening, I mean, we're talking obviously about climate change and the transport sector in this week, but we cannot ignore the war in Ukraine, for example, rising gas prices. All this also affects the transport sector. How do you ensure that transport, but also, of course, the general fight against climate change doesn't fall off the agenda in light of so many very, I don't know, apparent urgent crises?
Exactly. Of course, this is very much at the forefront of all our minds at the moment. The terrible war in Ukraine, this aggression that I can only despise and condemn in the utmost terms, is something that is at the moment really a game changer also in our climate policy and in our energy policy. So at the moment, obviously, we are focusing on becoming less dependent on fossil fuels from Russia. This is not easy to do for Germany because at the outset, before the war started, actually we relied on gas in our energy sector by more than half. And we're actually now already down to less than a third. So that is already actually a very big step. But it's not easy, obviously. And you're absolutely right. We cannot now abandon our climate targets. And this is something that we really don't want to do. And in the medium term, I'm sorry, in the medium term, actually, an accelerated energy transition has to be the solution to also having a diversified energy sector and an independent energy sector. So we want to be quicker with the energy transition. We're accelerating this, and this will help us in our energy security. So no, we're not losing sight. I also have to say that I'm quite encouraged, actually, by what I hear in international cooperation. I've already mentioned the G7 presidency that we're holding at the moment. And when the war started, we held an ad hoc meeting of the G7 energy ministers. And while, of course, this was focused on how do we now also help each other or send around common messages on our energy supply. We also, in this declaration of this special energy ministers meeting, we also all underlined our effort towards climate neutrality. So yes, we're not losing sight, not at all. And I'm very happy to see that, especially this message of we have to become even more ambitious, we have to become quicker in our energy transition, that this is a message that I hear around the world.
Okay. That is very encouraging. That's great to hear. And it's also very interesting for us to hear from somebody that has this experience from both ministries, from the Ministry for the Environment and then the Economic Affairs part that obviously plays a big role right now. I would like to pose my next question to Ms. Gönner. She has also been Minister for both sectors, basically. She has been Minister for the Environment and Transport in the federal state of Germany, Baden-Württemberg. Ms. Gönner, from your point of view, what do you think is a challenge when it comes from moving from this talking about ambition, raising ambition in the transport sector, to actually implementing those actions, the actions that are needed on the ground?
Well, we all know that at the global scale, we need to reduce the current emission level by about 75% until 2050. To achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. And Ms. Schwenk mentioned it before that we also in Germany, the most ambitious thing we have to do is the transport sector, because the transport is certainly one of the sectors with the fastest growing emissions. In the past, emissions have grown at a relatively constant rate of 2% year by year, and the difference from many other sectors that managed to slowly decrease the speed of emission growth, transport is hard. It's a hard nut to crack. And that, I think, is one of the things we have to have in mind. I think there are three main reasons for why mitigating emissions from this sector is not easy. Firstly, and as I said in the beginning, the transport sector is comprised of a very dispersed and very heterogeneous set of actors. You have civil society that needs access to transport and mobility services to go about their daily lives. Then there is the private sector and public operators that in many of our partner countries are often operating unregulated, and you have the governments of local, regional and national level. Secondly, we need high investments. Changing transport infrastructure for the better often requires relatively high capital expenditures. In the beginning, in infrastructure, for example, to build railways, but also investments in new vehicles, for example, when electrifying a bus vehicle fleet. In Chile, for example, GIZ therefore supported the Chilean Ministry of Transport to develop a financing mechanism that is meant to strengthen private sector investments in electric buses. And thirdly, transport is needed to achieving sustainable development and economic well-being. It is providing access to jobs and healthcare, but it is also a sector with millions of jobs, especially in our African partner countries. We need to do a lot more here and bring together the sustainable development and the climate agenda. Luckily, as Ms. Schwenk pointed out, the latest IPCC report showed that making the sector more climate-friendly can be done, and it can be done in a relatively cost-effective manner. It is therefore important that we support in leapfrogging expensive carbon-intensive transport infrastructure. So I think these are the main points why it is not easy to come in action, but we have now a lot of knowledge about cost effectiveness and that we can do it.
Thank you, Ms. Gönner. That very, very interesting that you mentioned these high investments, for example, this diversity of actors that make it so difficult and make our task here so challenging in mitigating emissions from the sector. You also mentioned the IPCC report that came out in April this year that actually showed us all the options that exist that we do have for reducing emissions also in the transport sector, but also showed us how far we are off from reaching the goals of the Paris Agreement, obviously. We will have the next COP at the end of this year in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh, the COP27. It's going to take place in an African continent now for the first time in a while. What developments would you like to see at COP27, but also in the near future, to actually put in place what we see in the IPCC report for reducing emissions?
Well, this is a very good question. And it's also a good question because, and you mentioned it before, between a COP in Glasgow and the COP in Egypt, there was starting the war in the Ukraine. And this is really not easy then, having clear how to discuss the things. Already at the last year's COP in Glasgow, we talked a lot about increasing the level of ambition in UN Enhanced National Climate Plans, the so-called NDCs. And I was very happy to see that 41% of countries committed to quantifiable targets for the transport sector, for example, by stating by how much they want to reduce emissions from transport. And it seemed that in the development of new NDCs and LTS, transport and environment ministers have been increasingly working together, which is something that we consider pivotal for the success of the Paris Agreement. But 41 is not all countries, and many of them do not yet include a comprehensive package of actions. For example, freight remains overlooked, similar to the promotion of activities, modes of mobility, such as walking and cycling. We discussed about the pedestrian. Therefore, for the coming year and until COP27 in Egypt, I'd be very happy to see dialogue of these areas. And the British presidency started the dialogue with declarations on e-mobility, aviation and shipping that many countries signed and supported. For the negotiations in Sharm el-Sheikh, we expect the COP in Africa to shine a spotlight on the needs of our partners there. Of course, the lion's shares of the 8 gigatons CO2 emissions from transport largely comes from European and Northern American countries. By 2050, Africa is expected to be home of 2.5 billion people. People will settle in cities and start to use their motor vehicles. Today's transport systems cannot cope with this enormous growth pressure, and greenhouse gas emissions will rise rapidly. For the well-being of us all, we need to increase our efforts in supporting a new approach to transport in Africa. And the question is if we can leapfrog to sustainable mobility. So I was very happy that we had this special Africa Day that Tuesday here at Transport Week 2021, because I think it's quite good for the discussion looking forward to COP27. And we are able to support building a network of peers here. But of course, the same is true for Europe, Asia, and Latin America. So I am looking forward that we connect the dots today here and discuss jointly.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ms. Gönner. We are actually going to connect the dots later in our session in the afternoon, the first after the networking break. And I also want to point you all to the panel where we will discuss what Ms. Gönner just told us, this COP27 approach. We heard about the G7 from Ms. Schwenk. So this approach of multilateralism to increasing climate action on the ground that we will have right after this opening. And Ms. Gönner is going to be a panelist there. But Ms. Schwenk, my last question to you now. I would really, really love to hear what your vision is for sustainable transport, for the future of transport, for maybe, let's say, 2030. What is your idea of transport? And of course, you can also use this opportunity to address our participants for the day.
Thank you very much. What a great question, actually. Vision is a very big word, especially if you're talking about 2030, because 2030 is just around the corner. So, but while vision is a big word, I think it is very good if we can envision where we want to go. So, yes, let me think about a few of the things that I would like to see in 2030 or maybe beyond. So, first thing is that e-mobility should be the main mode of transport, the main for our passenger cars. So that would be one. For this, we need a charging infrastructure, a very close network of charging infrastructure. So that's passenger cars. Then in terms of goods, I would like to see most of the transport of goods moved to rail and water. Third thing, cities. We have mentioned pedestrians a number of times. Well, this presupposes, of course, that we have all the locations that we need to reach in our daily lives, such as work, schools, medical services. We have to be able to reach them at short distance. So this actually means that in our cities, we have to do planning that allows us to reach these locations at short distance. So, yeah, cities like Copenhagen, for instance, spring to mind, which enable people to use their feet and their cycles a lot more. So. And then, but of course, I've mentioned aviation as well. So I think that we will be flying still a lot in 2030. And we have to fly in international cooperation as well. And we need this direct connection with other countries. So I don't see aviation as a sector that will go down. But the way to go is actually climate neutral flying. So I hope that by 2030, we will have a functioning market for synthetic fuels which are based on green hydrogen. And this would allow us then to decarbonize that sector as well. So these are the issues that I would like to see in our world of 2030. Maybe that's very ambitious, but yeah, at least in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. That's a great vision that you painted there for us, and let's see how far we can get closer today, maybe even by discussing these ideas. So a big thank you for having been with us and for opening the Berlin Day of the Transport and Climate Change Week with us. Ms. Schwenk will have to leave, but as I said before, Ms. Gönner is staying with us for the panel. But before we dive into this panel on multilateralism, I'm very, very happy to announce that we have a keynote by Jennifer Morgan. She is the State Secretary and Special Envoy for International Climate Action at the Federal Foreign Office, and she's going to give us an impulse, I think, for the discussions that we will hear later on the panel. So enjoy her keynote speech.
Thank you for the invitation to share some of my thoughts with you. I'm sorry not to be there to discuss this vital topic with you directly. I'm Jennifer Morgan. I'm the Special Envoy for International Climate Action at the German Foreign Office. My mandate is really to use all of the possible levers of foreign policy to drive climate transformation and to work in partnership nationally around the world and on the international level with many different change agents to accelerate the pace and scale of change. We're working on all levels because each plays an important role. Climate action in the transport sector certainly gives major support during COP, and I'm happy to see no less than 250 non-state actors located in Germany have committed in climate action in the climate sector, because to reach climate neutrality by 2045 requires their engagement, and we need to do more. Particularly in the aftermath of COP26 and its transport campaign, it's crucial for me that we secure commitments made by governments and companies, and that we broaden ownership of such initiatives, and last but not least, that we ensure transparent reporting and accountability of the implementation undergone by COP27. Germany takes part actively in the Zero Emissions Vehicle Transition Council, and we're newly discussing how to align the pace of the transition to zero-emission vehicles with the goals of the Paris Agreement to possibly support the COP26 declaration on accelerating the transition to 100% zero-emission cars and vans. And we're also obviously fully engaged with the Glasgow breakthrough on transport and making zero-emission vehicles the new normal and accessible, affordable, and sustainable in all regions by 2030. So on that multilateral level, indeed, we're working actively now through our G7 presidency, and we'll bring these issues into the Petersburg dialogue with a focus on some key issues. For example, how can each country strengthen their targets within their NDCs as committed in Glasgow? Certainly every country that has not yet submitted an enhanced NDC should do so this year. We're far away from the 1.5 goal. Additionally, though, every country should consider how it can strengthen its targets. This could be through a more ambitious renewable energy target, through a methane target, through including commitments to phasing out coal or the internal combustion engine into NDCs. We have to keep up this momentum and also step into this moment where it is so clear that a phase out of fossil fuels for peace, energy security, and climate security is necessary. Also on the multilateral level, adaptation and loss and damage are key issues. The impacts are hitting hard. And we need, as developed countries, to really deliver, put proposals on the table for loss and damage, and it's essential for trust, shifting the Chileans' finance at all levels. And specifically on transport, additionally, Germany strives to advance really the decarbonization of the transport sector in the G7 presidency. G7 partners are currently negotiating deliverables within the climate, energy, and environment track. And there are planned key deliverables such as all new light duty vehicles, including cars and vans being zero emission vehicles in the 2030s. So those are some examples. And it's clear that, yes, multilateral action is tougher right now because of the Russian war, but that doesn't mean that we should give up on it. In the past, the international climate community has managed to keep moving forward, to have the Paris Agreement be the place where multilateral action is possible, even when there are presidents who deny climate change. So we have to stay the course now as well. But of course, we need to adjust our approaches and strategies. I think one area that's really picking up steam is work at the plurilateral level to create new just energy transition partnerships with other countries. The focus is phasing out coal in a socially just way and building up renewable energy, because we need a quantum leap in ambition on all sides to make that work. And that's a way to also strengthen the collaboration with emerging and developing countries. We're also working bilaterally with key partners to see how we, through collaboration, can catalyze greater action, whether that be with China or the US or other countries like Chile. And in each initiative, we're engaging all actors, companies, scientists, think tanks, NGOs, social movements, as we really do need to align around achieving transformational change. We're looking for those disruptive moments where change can happen faster, and we're certainly in one now. And it's very clear that if we don't step in now and ensure that it's an acceleration of the phase out of fossil fuels, and we're not building long-term fossil fuel infrastructure, we will close that window to 1.5. So we have to be diligent here, as we know that there are others that wish to build as much new fossil fuel infrastructure as possible, and we need to strengthen our support to accelerating that energy transformation. Let me turn a bit to the transportation sector, because I think it's obviously central. I think it's helpful to start with some key facts from the latest IPCC, which you are all very aware of. But the scenarios literature really projects continued growth and demand across the board, particularly in developing countries in Africa and Asia. And it's projected to increase across all transport modes. And it's also clear that we have to reduce, IPCC says, a 59% reduction in transport-related CO2 emissions by 2050 compared to 2020. This means, according to the IPCC, that meeting climate change mitigation goals would require transformational changes in the transport sector. I won't go through all those measures, as you are all the experts there and you know better than I, but we need that rapid shift to sustainable decarbonized mobility and the imperative to scale up zero-emission vehicle technologies, including buses, trains, shipping, and aviation, personal vehicles. And that will require dramatically increasing the pace of the global decarbonization in the transport sector throughout the 2020s, and entails real support for rolling out that infrastructure that's required to make that possible. All of these measures, as Working Group 3 of the IPCC outline, will bring multiple benefits, will actually improve the well-being of billions of people around the world. I think the question that you're asking, and where I just want to share some final thoughts with you on, is like, what are the new approaches do we need to, in order to accelerate that pace and scale of change in the sector? So 2 thoughts on that, and then 1 additional challenge. The first is finance. The Paris Agreement includes a goal to shift the trillions, which is not yet being delivered. and is often discussed in the context of energy and phasing out fossil fuel financing and scaling up renewables, which of course is also vital for the electrification of the transportation sector. But obviously it's more complex than that. So how can we drive financial institutions, public and private, to decarbonize the transportation sector in a socially and ecologically sound manner? Second topic is partnerships. And there are a lot of discussions today around partnerships, clubs, and alliances. How should they be formulated? Who should participate? I actually did some thinking on myself with Lutz Weischer about this pre-Paris when I was in World Resources Institute. And I look back a bit at that work, and also I'm just in the constant phase of gathering inputs on this right now in my new role at the Foreign Office. Clearly, we need new forms, new attempts at driving ambition forward, because it's working only nationally or only in the UNFCCC is too slow. And I think in some parts of the transportation sector, we don't leverage what could a more international or plurilateral approach could look like. So one has to, of course, have a clear agreed goal amongst actors in such initiatives, and incentives to participate in an initiative. And if there's no incentives, it's very hard to engage other countries or corporations. But there also have to be criteria for that participation. Otherwise, the initiative would likely get watered down quite quickly. And of course, there needs to be some level of support for developing countries. My sense on these groupings is that it needs to be focused on specific outcomes, not the entire economy, whether that be the transformation of sectors or industries. Otherwise, I think the transaction costs are too high. It's too highly complex across an entire economy. But of course, you have to keep those linkages to other sectors in mind. Does that mean it's worth exploring a group of countries and companies coming together that have internal combustion engine phase-out dates to explore what the barriers are in the supply chain or otherwise, and find solutions across those ambitious countries that could support the achievement of those goals? Perhaps. But what are the ideas out there that we should be considering within government? And then finally, a critical issue. Obviously, there are numerous connected issues to consider, but I wanted to share just one, which is e-mobility is going to entail important shifts in supply chains, and raw materials like lithium will be needed in unprecedented quantities. And that's going to impact not only the local environment, but also create new employment situations in developing countries and affect local populations. More generally, I think the mineral sector, in particular for non-ferrous metals and rare earths, will become even more important globally. And at the same time, we see significant human rights risks in some areas. For example, large-scale recurrence to solar power. Currently, the production of solar panels is as much at risk of being tainted by forced labor. And here again, we have to ensure that supply chains can be monitored thoroughly from the raw material up to the consumer product. The transport transformation is here and now. We are in a disruptive moment in Europe and globally due to the Russian war, and it is in such moments that great jumps forward can and must occur. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts on how we can accelerate the pace and scale of change and how we can work forward to do so together. Thanks very much.
We have some applause here. Thank you, Ms. Morgan. So we heard from State Secretary Morgan, we heard from Ms. Schwenk and Ms. Gönner how important this joint action is, this cooperation. Obviously, Transport Week is about exchanging and about working together and cooperation between this very diverse set of actors. But Ms. Morgan obviously also stressed that this is a transformational change. This is difficult to achieve, and she, for example, said she would focus on specific outcomes, and maybe a sector-specific, even subsector-specific approach in working together and trying to ensure those linkages to the other sectors that we need. In our next session, we will take a closer look. We will discuss opinions, perspectives on how multilateralism, if multilateralism can be one of the stepping stones for achieving more climate action and more mitigation of emissions in the transport sector. And I'm very, very happy happy to welcome with me on stage today Mr. Christian Hochfeld. Christian is the director of Agora Verkehrswende. Agora Verkehrswende is a renowned think tank pushing for this transformation towards climate-friendly and sustainable transport systems. And he's going to take over now to lead you through this panel on multilateralism. Welcome, Christian.
Thank you very much, and a very warm welcome also from my side. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to lead you through this session of common challenges and joint solutions, which was already introduced by our State Secretary in the Foreign Office, Jennifer Morgan. One correction, I'm heading the Agora Verkehrswende, that's right, but we are not pushing for climate action. We are just advising our government with reaching their own targets. So I was very often introduced as someone said, oh, Christian, you have so high targets and aims in climate protection. That's not the case. The targets are set by the governments, and we are just trying to support how to implement this. And it was mentioned that this huge challenge of decarbonizing transport by mid-century can only be done in cooperation and in collaboration among countries. And before we get into the discussion with my dear panelists, which I introduced then in the order of appearance, let me make 3 points to introduce you to this session. First, when the war, this crucial war began in the Ukraine, our Chancellor said that this is a turning point in times. And that is true for 2 reasons. The first reason is it shows, and that has already been mentioned, that we really need to accelerate the phase out of fossil fuels in the whole world. Just not only for climate reasons now, but also for geopolitical reasons and for international security. So in this sense, I think that's a good news that now we, as an international community, try to accelerate this phase out. On the other hand, now it has never been before a moment in time when international cooperation is so much at risk, multilateral cooperation is so much at risk, because the Russians and maybe other countries, are not following and supporting a global cooperation which is needed for international cooperation. Secondly, we only 3 years ago, jointly with the World Economic Forum and GIZ, as Agora Verkehrswende, did a study for the Foreign Office, a huge Delphi survey with hundreds of experts worldwide, asking the question, do you think we will succeed in decarbonizing transport until mid-century globally? And do we have to make a difference between developing countries, emerging economies, and developed countries and the industrial world? And I think at the end it turned out to say, we can do this by mid-century if we cooperate, and we will fail if we are failing in cooperation, but we will fail all, because either the developing countries won't succeed, but also the industrial countries won't succeed because they will not, also support the turn of the markets. For example, when we talk about the phase-out of the combustion engine with the industry here in Germany, they say, well, we have to deliver to foreign markets, so we cannot phase out the combustion engine globally. And that shows the interdependency of developed countries on the one hand and also emerging economies on the other hand. So either do it together or fail alone. Thirdly, we did a study last year, which was also the basis for the reform of our Climate Act, which has been mentioned, that we are now aiming for climate neutral Germany by 2045. Which has been criticized by 2 sides. The one side said, that's much too fast and we will never succeed in this. And the other side said, it's much too slow because it's not in line with the Paris Agreement that Germany is only climate neutral by 2045. So, and honestly speaking, I would rather listen to the ones saying you're too slow. Because if we break down the budget from Paris to the German emissions, it's true that we will not achieve a situation where we all have the same amount of emissions and that we can do this jointly in a fair way. But what does it mean? It means that Germany has even much more to engage on international level to support others to deliver to the carbon targets. And it's not even a support, it's a co-investment, I would call it, rather than support or also joint approaches. It's a co-investment in our joint futures in a climate neutral transport system. So against this bottom line, I'm very happy now to discuss with renowned experts the role international cooperation, multilateral cooperation can play and what kind of multilateral cooperation we need to support the decarbonization of transport globally. And the first I would like to introduce is, and hopefully he's online, is O.P. Agarwal. He's the CEO of the World Resources Institute for more than 10 years now, around 15 years. And before this, he was more than 25 years in various positions in the Indian government on national level and on the state of Assam. It was a strong focus on transport, especially urban transport. And last time OP and I were discussing, he was in Bengaluru in a very smooth climate, I have to say. But I think now you're back in Delhi and maybe also, having this really hot times in Delhi. So OP, what's the temperature in Delhi? And the more serious question is, India only last year pledged to be carbon neutral by 2070, and even more challenging, signing the Glasgow Declaration for accelerating the transition to zero-emission vehicles to make all sales climate neutral by 2040. So in this sense, how do you think international cooperation and especially multilateral cooperation can help India to succeed and to fulfill these goals? Opie, I'm very happy that you are with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Christian. Thanks for the introduction, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thanks for inviting me to this extremely important panel. Let me respond in two parts. One, very quickly capturing what's happening in India right now, and then moving on to how I think multilateral cooperation or multilateralism can help. So essentially, as Christian very rightly said, India made commitments for a net zero by 2070. 2070 may not align with the global 2050 goal, but the interesting part was India made fairly ambitious commitments for 2030. I think an interim target of that nature, which is pretty ambitious in itself, would be a signal of how well they can either reach 2070 net zero or maybe even advance that with some learning by 2030. So it's not just a net zero goal, but there are other interim targets of having 500 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2030, having 50% of the energy requirement coming from renewable sources, 1 billion ton reduction in greenhouse gases. So all of these were fairly ambitious, and today it's really trying to find pathways towards achieving these 2030 goals itself. I think it's put itself on track, and I think action has begun in many ways fairly aggressively. Coming to the transport sector itself, a little bit about what's happening on the transport sector. There's a massive effort towards investments in public transport. Moving away from personal motor vehicles. India's personal motor vehicle share is still low, but given the increasing income levels and given the rising urban population, the apprehension is we may see a scaling up of personal motor vehicles unless we see very good and rapid investments in public transport. So that is one area where a lot of work is happening. Many cities are trying to build both metro rail systems and improve public bus services. The other one is around technologies. So again, a huge push towards e-mobility. The initial effort is really on electric buses. Some very successful procurement strategies have been launched and have proved very sort of encouraging. About 5,500 electric buses are being procured through an aggregated demand of 9 cities. And the results that we've got in that procurement are giving us rates which are actually lower than diesel bus rates. Now, this has provided the encouragement. Thinking now is, can we now go for the next level of 10,000 electric buses through an aggregated model? So this is the kind of thing, a very aggressive move towards e-mobility in many ways. I think it's not just on the urban transport side, even on the intercity transport, there are a lot of things that are happening. The Indian Railways has decided to get to net zero by 2030, and 100% of its sort of network is going to be electrified by 2023. There are a number of high-speed rail projects that are coming up. Almost about 7,800 kilometers of high-speed rail are being planned. The expectation is that this kind of high-speed rail will help reduce the need for short-haul air travel. That again will be a kind of reduction that will take place. The big contribution to carbon emissions from the transport sector is the road freight sector. Now, in order to shift the road freight sector towards rail or marine transport, we are planning on a number of dedicated freight corridors by rail. That will be another initiative that will help move away from. So these are a whole lot of actions that are happening in the country in a comprehensive manner to help reduce emissions from this. Now, unfortunately, I've run out of time. I've not been able to say what would happen on multilateralism, but could I either say that later or can I take a few minutes more?
It's a good teaser, OP. So you can talk about this later. We have a second round, and definitely we won't forget it. And I also would like to ask one question, which you should also think about already. What's the most important thing international and multilateral cooperation brings to India? Is it investment? Is it knowledge transfer, technology transfer? That's something we should jointly think about. And now I'm turning to my former boss, because before I joined the Agora, I was also working for GIZ. So I hope you forgive me that I'm using the English you and stay with Tanja here, which what I would never do if she is still my boss, but now I can do so. As a think tank head, you can be everything you want in Germany. So in this regard, I'm very happy that you're still online in Vilnius. And I mean, you already mentioned the broad expertise GIZ has in international cooperation on sustainable transport and supporting and working with other countries to decarbonize the transport sector. And how would you see the benefit from this experience, the lessons learned from this experience also for Germany? What makes sense, and how can international and also multilateral cooperation, besides bilateral cooperation, support the decarbonization of transport sector between emerging economies, developing countries, and our industrial world?
Well, thank you so much, Christian. And it was a very nice insight of how you think about what think tanks can do in Germany. So thank you also for this very special insight. At GIZ, I will say we are already working on transport and climate change in a comprehensive manner, and since many years. You know that because you was one of our guys who was in the field at that point before joining now Agora Verkehrswende. But we must acknowledge that the transformation of transport is not yet as visible as other areas, such as the energy transition. In her keynote speech, State Secretary Jennifer Morgan highlighted that important aspects of the transport transformation are already being discussed on international level. This is especially true for electrifying transport systems, which is, of course, quite an important challenge. Other important aspects from our perspective, however, are not yet as prominently featured in the global discourse. This is especially true for topics that GIZ has been working on for a long time already, such as the promotion of public transport systems or active modes of transport. This avoid shift dimension, how we call it at GIZ, or mobility transition as you or how you, Christian, call it at Agora Verkehrswende, is still not sufficiently visible in the climate negotiations. This has been, for example, highlighted in a series of 18 so-called peer exchange meetings. On 3 continents, we have convened online meetings of representatives of ministries of transport and environment to discuss their challenges and possible solutions to improving mobility systems. We need to make sure that we continue to support and even intensify our efforts to support our partners. One interesting example of sharing the experience and lessons learned across borders and by fostering multilateral cooperation is the Council for Decarbonizing Transport in Asia. The Council only recently published a flagship report and is being supported by the ET-funded NDC Transport Initiative for Asia. The initiative is implemented by GIZ jointly with several other partners. You, Christian, and also Mr. Agarwal from the World Resource Institute are just 2 of those involved in this project. And I think there is one of the council members, the head of transport at the Asian Development, in the audience today in Berlin. And several others are involved in the Transport Week as well. The Council is a great approach to define a joint vision and understand the pathway to get there and develop local solutions considering international experience. And I think this is what we can learn in Germany from that peer exchange is necessary, that peer exchange is very fruitful, and we can also learn something from our colleagues, be it from Asia, be it also from Latin America. What does fit and how does it fit? And that, I think, is what's quite a great opportunity for all of us, because we stand together in front of this challenge, but we can solve together solutions and find solutions. That's why I think multilateral cooperation is quite good. We need to discuss it on a multilateral dimension, but then to act in bilateral way. So that's what we try to support as GIZ.
Thank you very much, Tanja, for especially pointing out pointing out 2 things. First, the importance of still, increasing the awareness of transport in the climate negotiations, and also the, let's say, bidirectional consequences of this cooperation, that we can also learn a lot on instruments, technologies, but also business models, which could be also of benefit for decarbonizing the German transport sector. And with this in mind, I'm very happy to introduce our 3rd guest. I think this is really a great honor and pleasure also to have her with us. It's Kuki, I hope I pronounce it right, Soejachmoen, and hopefully otherwise you will correct me if I'm wrong, from Indonesia. And Indonesia is an important country, not only for transport, but especially also because it has now, this year, the G20 presidency. Next year it will be India in 2023, and the year after India it will be Brazil. So 3 emerging economies, are heading the G20 presidency. And my question would be, apart from the UNFCCC, would it be important, and wouldn't it be important to have also decarbonizing transport, sustainable transport, also higher on the agenda of the G20 in the next years? Because, I mean, in general, G20 is an organization for economic security, but on the other hand, sustainable transport is a prerequisite in the future of economic development, prosperity and welfare. And therefore, I'm very happy to listen to you. What is transport already part of the Indonesian G20 presidency, or how can multilateral cooperation also support Indonesia with the transformation of the transport sector in a decarbonized world? Kuki, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christian. You pronounce my name almost correct, so it's Kuki Soejachmoen. And thanks again for inviting me to this session, and also for having me. It's quite sometimes that I haven't been in the transport community, but I'm so glad that I'm back here. So to respond to your questions, Christian, I think indeed we need to have transport as, especially sustainable transport as one of the agenda, I think, within G20 as well. But for this year, we don't have specific agenda on transport, but we have issues or agenda on infrastructure, so sustainable infrastructures, which will include transport in it as well. But I think when we are talking about this overall transport and climate, then I tend to agree what you mentioned earlier, that to decarbonize transport system globally by mid of this century, it will be very challenging. But I think we can do it, and especially what we need, I think it's more than just, you mentioned about securing the market, right? But it's more than securing the market. It's also, I think, to develop the how do you call it, the business and the production in all over the world. So it's not only securing the market, but it's beyond that, it's more on technology cooperation. So I think that would be one of the areas that we need to work on if we are talking about sustainable transport, decarbonized transport sector in the future. And I think I would like also to share what happened in Indonesia right now. As you may know, and others as well, that with the raising population, then we need more mobilities as well, and we also have this issue of urban sprawling, which lead to all this more unnecessarily long distance transport. But now, at least for some cities in Indonesia, we try to move ourselves to shift from private to more mass transit, be it the bus rapid transit, or we already have this MRT also, and soon to be in operational for this the LRT. It is also a way to reduce the emission from the ICE, the internal combustion engine, to electrified transport system. But the issue then, I think maybe for the next round, then the issue will be what type of electricity that we are using. So we cannot just move from fossil fuel, gasoline, and so on, to electricity if the electricity itself it's not clean. So I think it's at the end we will need to go back to the whole issue of, I think earlier mentioned by Jennifer Morgan also, on just energy transition partnership, or maybe in a more broader rather than just partnership for a number of countries, then maybe in a more multilateral way. So I think I'll just stop there, and looking forward for the next round. Thanks, Christian.
Thank you very much, Kuki. And just to also give a short outlook to the second round, you are also managing director of the Indonesia Research Institute for Decarbonization, and also heading a Think 20, so this is the group of think tanks around the G20, the working group on climate, energy transition and environment. So maybe you can think about 3 recommendations to the G20 from your perspective on decarbonizing transport. how this should be handled in G20. That would be really fantastic. In the meantime, I'm now welcoming here on stage, so I am not alone, that's quite nice, Artur Runge-Metzger, also a member of the Council of the Agora Verkehrswende for a couple of years now. And Artur Runge-Metzger now is with Germanwatch, a German NGO, but formerly, until 2021, he was director at DG Klima in the European Commission, responsible for the climate strategy in non-ETS, mainly on non-ETS. And he also, before this, and meanwhile, represented the EU in climate negotiation, especially also in the ad hoc group in preparing the Paris Agreement. So one of the fathers or relatives of the Paris Agreement, and it's a great honor to have you today also with us. Asking the question, there's a lot of discussion now about, you know, the Fit for 55 package, the European Green Deal, and also partnerships with other countries on leadership partnerships. We can call it climate clubs. I mean, this is how it's also discussed under the G7 at the moment. So partnerships where we have similar, let's say, level of engagement in climate. Is this something which could be a way forward also in the transport sector to have, let's say, climate neutral transport clubs or this kind of cooperation? How could this look like? And would this be an added value in the transport sector for international decarbonization of transport? Artur, good to have you with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christian. And thank you for the kind invitation to come to Berlin and participate in person. It's quite a different experience than sitting in front of a screen on Zoom, I must admit. And the coffee here is also very good, to be honest. But it's also nice to see so many on-screen with whom we have been working in the past on climate change. And I think that shows that without international cooperation and partnership, we wouldn't have gotten to the Paris Agreement in the first place. So it is central to get everybody on board. And when it comes to the various forms, yes, I think it is important also not only to try to do things with all the 190 plus countries around the world in the UN context. I think Jennifer was saying it before, it just takes such a long time. But we need to move a certain critical mass, and you can do that if you have the right partners around the table. And if you look at the world in terms of transport, road transport, kind of the real major players and demandeurs are China, the United States, and Europe. And if we align to move forward together, I think then we will make it. And I think that is what we are currently seeing with the electrification of passenger cars and light-duty vehicles, where over the past decades we have been working on tightening standards, and we are now coming to the point where we have to jump ahead. And it's not Europe that has done it first. I think it is China who has putting this out first in the last couple of years, and it has become part of their industrial strategy. And Europeans are now following up. So it is quite good that we had talks in this kind of context, not forming a climate club as such, but to at least go into the same regulatory direction. Because what industry needs around the world is predictability and certainty. And for that, you need some common regulatory approaches. But common regulatory approaches means you will not get it exactly the same in different parts of the world, but you can get close to it. And I think the history shows over the last years how that was done. And with our Chinese and American partners, and also Indian partners, we were talking a lot about standard setting, how to do it, also to make sure that the industries that are in different places can work together. Because Kuki, I think, was saying very rightly that we need to focus also on business and industry to produce that. So partnerships and climate clubs are things that are good. And if we have climate clubs that even formulate a very concrete goal, as Jennifer was asking for, like I think the most prominent one on the passenger vehicles is the end of the combustion engine. I think that's a good thing to rally around and to try to establish a big marketplace and a lot of predictability in the context of that climate club to move this discussion forward. Where it is certainly more necessary is even when it comes to heavy-duty vehicles, because these are smaller markets, and it's much more fragmented at the present point in time. And I think in the G20 there have been in the past attempts to try to get to some regulatory convergence on heavy-duty vehicles with, I would say, very limited success. So maybe this is something for a G20 presidency to try to reinvigorate that process and say, let's set standards for also heavy-duty vehicles. In Europe, this is being done. I think this next year we'll see another proposal for the smaller vehicles. We have already one that has been adopted recently for the others. And then where it is even more important, international cooperation and creating clubs, is when it comes to shipping, international shipping. Therefore, it's called international and international aviation. And here, I think if we look at the track record, it has been rather dismal over the past decades. There's now quite a number of new thinking, fresh thinking coming into the place. There's the discussion in ICAO, which I think going forward not as fast as we would like to see. And we'll see what results this is going to give, and also on shipping. So the Glasgow initiatives taken on that, I think they are kind of changing the thinking in terms of how to attack that. And it's important that kind of if you move from one port to the other and you want to run your ship on a new and a different type of fuel, you need to be able to bunker that fuel in different places. So to have a cooperation between different harbors and main shipping lines, I think that would be a big way forward. Apart from many things that can already be done today and where we can learn from each other, like electrifying ships when they are in the port, because that's one of the easiest things, instead of running them on their engines in the ports, that we can do today. So we should set a milestone in the very near future. The last point I want to make is on the Ukraine crisis, which really underlies lines kind of that we need to move faster also for security reasons out of fossil fuels. And that, I think, also needs some kind of international cooperation. Because as we know, Europe moving out of Russian oil is not going to solve the equation, because you can ship oil to any place in the world. So that might not help. So also there, I think a different kind of cooperation, and that's probably more challenging even than under the climate arena, needs to move forward in the coming months.
Thank you very much, Artur. Working nearly the whole life at the European Commission and for the European Union leaves some legacy, I think, with a view on international cooperation. You're pointing out that you worked also a lot in your past with the European, I would call it, beauty and beast, the industry, the car industry, which definitely is an issue. International cooperation is also needed to, transform them, because their supply chains and their markets are global. And if we don't move, jointly, that would leave some room for not transforming, and I think this is what we cannot afford. And I think it was also very interesting to listen to you saying that maybe it's not a climate club on transport, but it's more, smaller clubs or very specific clubs on certain issues in the transport sector where cooperation is needed. I know that now Tanja is a little bit on the rush to her next meeting in Vilnius, and therefore, I don't know if we have the chance to have a last question to her. I don't see her at the moment. She's still there. Very good. Yeah. I think one important thing is, which we also learn from the discussions which we have currently here in Europe, and especially in Germany and in France, is that there is a huge fear among the population that this climate policy, especially ambitious climate policy, especially in transport, will lead to social friction, social injustice, an unjust transition. And therefore, I think it's very important, especially looking also at other countries, emerging economies, developing countries, that either there is a just, fair, and social equal transition, or there is no transition. And so my question to you is a little bit, how do you link those two aspects of, social equity and social aspects and transport and climate policy and transport in your work at the GIZ? Is it also an issue already in the cooperation, or how do you think this should be handled in the cooperation, international cooperation on technical level?
Well, this is really a tricky question. First of all, I think one of our approaches is always to bring together the different interests. Mm-hmm. And we discussed about partnerships and the different opportunities for partnerships also with countries and on the multilateral level. And I think it's a little bit the same as we try to bring the people together on this level. It is the same how our approach is in the different countries. That means we try to bring the people on the table and then to discuss about the interest and how to bring interests together, and not only discussing about one against the other, but thinking about how are the solutions that fits to both sides. I think this is one of our real good approaches, stakeholder discussions, and really working together and searching for solutions together. And for that, you need trust. You have to build on trust with the partners in the countries, but also on the international level. Because if you know each other, if you know that you are able to really open discuss and know that the other tries to understand what is that's quite a good thing then to balance the different interests. And that's how we work, how we try always to explain that this is a quite good success factor. And there are a lot of examples in how we build up the partnerships on one hand on the multilateral level, but also bring that in our projects then on the ground. And I think this is really a success factor to balance the different interests. These are crucial interests for both sides, but I think this is also then the opportunity, the ability really to balance these different interests. And there are a lot of solutions to pay into these different interests.
Thank you very much. I think totally right, and we see this also a lot in German discussions, in European discussions, that the future of transport is something to negotiate and sometimes also to mediate between different interests to find the right way forward between the different interests. Thanks very much. And I now hand over, as promised, again to Opi. Opi, you had not a homework to do, but some time for thinking about the questions on multilateralism and also the most important things from your perspective, international multilateral cooperation brings as a support for the Indian development. Opi, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Christian, and thanks for giving me those questions in advance. So it gave me the time to prepare. But I think multilateralism should rest on 5 pillars. The first is technology development and sharing. I think today, with the kind of technologies, the newer technologies that we are looking at, there is a need for a lot of technology development. Let's not get stuck with the lithium-ion battery. There are a lot of other chemistries that are being researched, and I think this needs multilateralism to take it forward. There are very interesting technologies that are being developed. I think that is one area which will be very important for multilateralism. The second and extremely important is knowledge sharing and capacity building. I would say knowledge sharing, experience sharing, capacity building. As Tanja mentioned, peer-to-peer learning. I think this is going to be the second pillar for multilateralism. It's going to be very important. The third pillar, I think, is investments. Investments are going to be very important in taking the agenda forward. The fourth pillar is, again, as Artur said, certain sectors will need multilateralism. They cannot happen in one country. And international shipping, international aviation are sectors that he mentioned, which need multilateralism if you have to move into newer technologies. I think the fifth pillar, which we often don't recognize, is that multilateralism helps each country to get even more motivated or encouraged to move forward. Particularly when you realize that, look, we are not alone in doing it. There are others who are doing it with us. The support that you get through seeing multilateral action is what takes the agenda forward much faster. So to my mind, these are the 5 pillars that multilateralism need to focus on. We in India would benefit immensely from the technology development and technology sharing. As we said, new battery technologies, new work or new ways of green hydrogen production. These will be very interesting. We have a number of programs of capacity building and knowledge sharing. I think multilateralism could help support that. It will be extremely useful. And of course, investments. These 3 are very important. I think we feel encouraged that many countries are coming together to do it. Whether you have smaller clubs or you have a big club is a question that is difficult to answer. But I think on certain segments, you need a smaller club. In certain segments, you need a bigger club. But we should be in a situation where 1 or 2 laggards should not hold others behind. I think that's the important thing to keep in mind. But completely agree that multilateralism is the way to go forward. Thanks, Christian. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Kuki. I don't know why, Germans are so addicted to clubs, especially in Berlin, but maybe because they failed in building the big city club in football. Therefore, they look for other sports to be more successful, like climate action. Let's see. Now I hand over again, and I'm looking very much forward, Kuki, to your recommendations to the G20, how to, give more awareness to decarbonization of transport.
Thanks, Christian. And I think it's not an easy task as well, even though you already raised that earlier. But I think if we are talking about decarbonizing transport, and especially under the task force that I'm currently leading, which is on governing climate target, energy transition, and environmental pollution, then maybe what already mentioned by Artur, common regulatory approaches is something that we need also to raise, at least starting within the G20. And honestly, I'm not sure whether we need to start with the heavy duty vehicle or the passenger vehicles first, but I think we need to start with something. And in my personal opinion, maybe it is easier in a way to start with the passenger cars because it's like more, how do you call it? It's maybe the market is more, it's a bigger market compared to the heavy duty vehicles. And also, if we are talking about let's say the economic capability of the consumers, then maybe this is where we can start. So to try with if I can say, maybe low-hanging fruit kind of thing. And the second one, because I think we are focusing more on land transport, even though I know that, and already mentioned earlier, both by OP as well as Artur, that for the other, like the the water as well the aviation, then multilateralism is something that we need. Even though for countries like Indonesia, we also have issues like domestic aviation as well as domestic water transport. But then we need something like based on multilateralism to govern, especially that cross-border issue. And if we are talking about land transport, then our suggestion would be shifting to mass transit and using the electrifying transport system. But as I mentioned earlier, then one of the biggest issue is the source of the electricity itself. So from our task force, basically one of the biggest issue that is also the one of the priority area of the G20 in Indonesia now. The presidency is on just energy transition. So just energy transition is a must because this is not only talking about electricity and like individual energy consumption, but also for other sectors like industry as well as transportation. So we need to ensure that, or to ask for more cooperation and partnership on just energy transition. And of course, as G20 is, as you already mentioned earlier also, Christian, it's basically more like economic forum. So we need economic cooperation and investment and, maybe setting a certain, how do you call it, maybe enabling environment so that the investment for more climate-friendly transport, overall transport system. So it's not only the cars, but also talking about the energy, talking about the fuels, talking about development of new technology and so on need to be set so that we can have like at least start with the G20 and then we can have it for a more broader partnership or maybe multilateral at the multilateral level later on. Thanks, Christian.
Thanks very much, Kuki, for also an optimistic view on the question if G20 will take on some of the questions and challenges from decarbonizing transport, which I think would be really a great success, especially as I mentioned, given the fact that in the course of the next 3 years, 3 emerging economies will have the presidency, where we see a huge change in the transformation sector and a huge growth in transport, passenger transport as well as freight transport. With an eye on the time, I would also love to open the floor for you and your questions, but also comments. And we start here in the auditory, and then we will also integrate some questions from the online participants. Currently, they are written in dark gray on black, so it's rather a question if I will ever be able to read them, but I will try. But you could help me a lot in the meantime to ask a question here that I can try to see what has been written online and where the questions are. So if there is a question here in the auditory, you will help me as a moderator, but also have the chance to ask your question here. Please, Connie, the floor is yours, and you were the icebreaker. And let me say.
Thank you very much, and good luck with the reading of the gray on the black. Although black on gray might be easier, but
you might come up to help me a little bit with this.
I think it's a very interesting topic of the discussion. It's something that I've been working on for quite a long time in my career, how to get transport into the climate discussions. And I was a little bit intrigued that not to see a speaker of the TDA here. The TDA is the Transport Decarbonization Alliance, and this is something which was started, I think, 5 years ago. And the idea was there really how do we get transport into the climate negotiations? Because I think a lot of the clubs that have been discussed and have been mentioned and things like that in initiatives, these are all happening on a parallel track to the official climate negotiations. And I think like what OP was mentioning, his 5 pillars, that the pillar that I was missing there was targets. Because I think that we do need to break down, we need to go down to a sectoral level in the climate negotiations. And this was something that the TDA was intended to do. Like, why is it that we are not able, in the context of the UNFCCC, to actually have sectoral discussions? Because we keep talking about the national level, but there is never a breakdown into sectors. And I think that that's also missing in the whole discussion here.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Artur, would you like to answer this question, which is mainly about targets? Artur will not be able to answer the question while TDA is not here on the floor, but I mean, the necessity of targets in the transport sector, I think, is something you will also very much, or you are very much aware of.
Yes, of course. And I'm a believer in targets, definitely. And I'm also a believer in the need to break down targets to individual sectors. The question is whether you can do that in the UN, where you would have to talk about the global transport sector. And I don't think that it's going to be easy to set a target there. We have tried for a long time with ICAO and IMO to see whether they could set targets, and they came in very late into this discussion and were hesitating for a very long time. And I think it's even going to be more difficult if you were to try to negotiate a global transport target for the road transport sector, where the challenges are so different. And where, to be honest, even Europe is not just we always say we are the leaders, but in terms of leadership, we are limping in terms of our leadership when it comes to transport, as our emission figures show. And it would complicate the debate and the negotiations very much if you were to negotiate sectoral targets at the international level. It doesn't mean that there shouldn't be talks, because there's many technical talks when it comes to exchanging views on how do I do certain things in certain sectors, and there's plenty of these little fora that are even part of the UN process to discuss these matters. But it's not about setting targets as such. What I would expect definitely is that these next round of nationally self-determined contributions, that they will become more granular. What we see at the present point in time, they focus a lot on energy and the energy sector, and that other countries will also do the necessary analysis in the coming years to come up with their national transport targets and goals. And you see, even in Germany, how difficult it is a discussion. And even setting the targets doesn't mean that you already have fulfilled them, as the colleague from the Ministry of Economics was saying. They now have to turn to a corrective action plan in order to make sure that they meet the targets they have set themselves.
Thanks very much. Now it's red on black. I can read it. But if there is another question here, please.
Thank you very much for the very enriching discussion. I was just wondering that to what extent, when we talk about multilateralism being a tool to promote the change, are we also addressing the realities at the ground level, the challenges per se? Say, for instance, in a country like India, which is so diverse, with very different priorities and requirements, how are we addressing them and bringing them to such forums when we are talking about a change at such a macro level, I would say? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And maybe this question can go out to OP. OP, did you get this question on how should be the, let's say, diverse situation on the ground in India be addressed in this a little bit more macroscopic discussions if we talk about multilateral cooperation?
See, I think the diversity in India is well known. But I think the important thing is what we are trying to achieve or where we are trying to go has to be rooted in our context. And I think a good understanding of what is right in our context is the right way to move ahead. What we have been arguing here in WRI and similar organizations working in India is let's understand our context and try to do what is best for us to do to achieve that global goal. I think that's how we at least are trying to take the diversity into account. Of course, there are issues of diversity within the country. And the diversity within the country is in terms of diversity in income groups, diversity in different provinces in terms of what their transport networks look like. Those diversities have to be taken care of locally. To quite an extent, it is happening because we have diverse approaches to what's happening in the bigger cities vis-a-vis what is happening in the smaller cities. But I think a recognition of this diversity is extremely important. So I completely agree with the question. I think the way we are taking it forward may not be exactly aligned with the complete diversity, but that may not be very easy to do. But I think the key thing I'm trying to say here is that we are taking note of what our situation in India is vis-a-vis other parts of the world and keeping that in mind as we take our action forward.
Thank you. Another question now from online I would like to pose to you, Artur, is we learned that many of the international agreements and already some declarations which were mentioned are focusing on the technology and the shift to electric vehicles. Why don't we see more declarations, cooperations on promoting public transport, promoting modal shift, things which definitely also are needed if we talk about a decarbonized world, because we won't be able to have enough renewable electricity and enough renewable energies if we don't bring down the energy demand by shifting away from passenger cars and private cars to public transport.
I think the answer is very simple, because if you fix on a single technology, it's very easy to kind of group yourself around that single technology. If you look at public transport and also how to move freight transport to different modes, I think it's a much more complex question. It involves, I think Tanja was mentioning that earlier, many more actors. And I think that makes it so difficult in order to have a big alliance around that. But it is going to be absolutely necessary. And I think at the center of such a coalition will have to be the person that is going to move from A to B, because that is the person that requires the service. And I think people are not moving from private to public because it's inconvenient, it's difficult, it's somehow seen as expensive and so on. So I think that is probably where you will have to start and then see how you can move around it. There's some kind of little subclubs I can think of, and OP was mentioning one of those is, for instance, electric buses. Again, there you could kind of group around a particular technology that is being built, and you can see it now being rolled out in different parts of the world. But I think the wider question of modal shift is quite a complex one, but it is something that should be addressed. Also because we have such a diversity of situations which we need to address.
Before we come to an end, maybe a last question to Kuki, which is also here online, and it fits very well together to the questions which we discussed already, is the question of, do we need new declarations, new clubs, or do we have to follow up the existing ones in a more stringent way to bring them also to succeed instead of jumping from one declaration to another? What would be your opinion there?
Quite challenging to the question, but I think For me, maybe just stick with the existing one, but make sure that it is, how do you call it, detailing the implementation and how the cooperation to make sure that the target within the declaration will be achieved. And I think this is also to, if I may, to respond to what Courtney mentioned earlier about bringing this issue to the UNFCCC, I do agree with Artur. I mean, like, for me, I think those issues related to the specific sectors would be best to have like, maybe we can call it like a parallel, but something outside the process, the UNFCCC process, and bring whatever the result into the process, and maybe into one of the agenda, let's say the mitigation or adaptation, and I think another area that I would like also to bring, if we are talking about climate and transport, I think we also need to think about the impact of climate to the transport sectors and transport system, because we tend to think that the role of transport is only emitting the greenhouse gases, but in fact the transport system will be one of the sector that I should say will be hard hit by the impact of the climate. So yeah. I think, stick with the existing declaration, but make sure that the step-by-step for implementation is there. So it's not just declaration, but declaration with real action plan and something that is doable. So I'll just stop there, Christian.
Thanks very much, Kuki. And with this having said, I think we will also come to the end of this session, as Nadia is also approaching, which is definitely indicating that we should come to an end. And thank you very much, all of you. Thank you, Kuki, Opi, and Artur, and also Tanja, who is already on the move again, for the strong commitment to international and multilateral cooperation to decarbonize transport. I think last year was really a special year for climate action, for climate change. We can see it was rather, I would say, Olympic, because it was a special Olympic year, where we see higher targets in the countries, a lot, new pledges for net zero around the world. We saw faster implementation, so the targets have to be met and faster. But the question is, do we really also, or did we saw a stronger climate action? And this is a huge question. I think that will be shown in the future. And I'm there with Connie. Now the countries have to break down their, overarching pledges on net zero to see what does it mean for transport. And I think they will see how challenging this will be to, decarbonize the transport sector in the same time as for the whole economy in general. And that's where international and multilateral cooperation is essential and the key for reaching those targets in time. Otherwise, again, I think we will fail, but I will leave it with the optimistic view that with international cooperation, we will succeed. And with having said this, I'm again, thank you also for your attendance and your interest in this session, also online. And I will now hand over again to Nadia, thanking you very much for your attention.